has a reasonably long history of banning books. It goes back all the way to the early 20th century when India was a part of British Empire. 1920s was the time when India, still under British, was getting polarized along religious lines. Hindus were forming their own organizations such as RSS, and Muslims, while still under British control, were fighting for the resurrection of caliphate in Turkey. And this is where it all begins, with the publishing of a book in 1927. It was called Rangila Rasool, loosely translated as Colorful Prophet. And you might get some idea where this goes. Interestingly, the publisher never revealed the real name of the author. Sometimes he was called Pandit Chamupati Lal, sometimes he was called Krishan Prasad, but nobody really knows. What we do know is the publisher was from Lahore. His name was Mahashay Rajpal, and probably he was behind writing this book, or maybe some of his friends were there. As I said, it was a time of religious tensions. So before this book came out, there was a pamphlet distributed by some Muslims in which they showcased the Hindu goddess Sita as a prostitute. And as a result, then somebody came up with this book. It's not really a great piece of literature as you would expect, and it only serves one purpose, and that is to offend Muslims, and which is precisely what it did. And the communal tensions that were already rising, they only got worse from there. Muslims were demanding the persecution of the publisher and the writer, who was unknown, but fortunately or unfortunately, there was no law back then to persecute anybody who's insulted a religious figure or mocked religion. And then the British government came up with 295A, which is still there, and now it became a criminal offense to insult a religion or a religious figure. But until then, there was no problem with that. And now, as it happened, as the protests were rising, a 19-year-old guy called Ilmuddin got inspired to kill the publisher. And he did exactly that. He stabbed the publisher, Mahashay Rajpal, to death. And then there was trial and proceedings, and eventually Ilmuddin was sentenced to death. Now he died, but this further created a huge divide between Hindus and Muslims. Muslims leaders such as Muhammad Ali Jinnah supported Ilmuddin's right to kill the other person because he was defending his religion and he was young. In fact, the great poet Muhammad Iqbal praised Ilmuddin, and he said that this boy has done something great that even we couldn't do, and he has served the religion. Interestingly, to this day, many people still pay huge respect to Ilmuddin. They go to his grave, sometimes they make vows, and to this day the divide remains. But back then it paved the way to an independent country for Muslims, which is now called as Pakistan. And as you can see, religion has been a major cause for banning the books. And most recent examples you can find was probably 2014 book The Hindus by Wendy Donicher, and 1988-89 book called The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. These two books were well researched. In fact, one of them is novel, The Satanic Verses, and you can consider them good piece of literature, unlike Rangila Rasool, which was clearly having one intentions, that was to offend a certain group of people. The Hindus wasn't really banned by the government, but there was some conflict between the publishers and the conservative groups, following which the publishers removed the book from the market. Now I think it's available in the markets. But yes, primarily in between these two religions, Hindus and Muslims, you would find a lot of books being banned. Sometimes other religions do it too. For example, the Vinci Code was banned in Nagaland after the protests by Christians. But at the national level, you'd find the two groups only, Hindus and Muslims. So similarly, after Rangila Rasool, you'd find Hungary, which offended Muslims. Then there was The Land of the Lingam in 1937, which offended Hindus. Then there was a book called Aisha in 1963, which offended Muslims. Before that, there was a book called Rama Retold, or Ramayana in some versions it was called, and it was a spoof of Hindu texts called Ramayana, and that was banned in 1955. Around that period only, there was another book called What Has Religion Done for Mankind, which kind of offended both Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, primarily outside Christianity and Judaism. So religion played an important role when it came to hurting people's feelings by certain books. But so did politics. Same thing had started in British India as well, when a couple of books, one called The Face of Mother India, sometimes referred to as Mother India, and Mysterious India. The first one in 1936 and second 1940, both these books presented a horrific view of India. They presented stereotypical images, criticized the cultural norms, and really went on to justify certain massacres and atrocities by the British on India, implying that the British were superior race. So there was a lot of anger and backlash with these books. Then post-independence, there were a number of books written by Pakistani authors, especially on the issue of Kashmir. One of them was called Captive Kashmir. They were banned. There was a novel called Khak aur Khoon. It was an Urdu novel that was also banned, which gives you the story of partition and how Hindus slaughtered Muslims during the partition. And the idea was that it just showed one side of the story, not the other side. But anyway, the culture of banning books continued. A couple of surprising books you find in 1960s, both by Nobel Prize winners. One is called An Area of Darkness by V.S. Naipaul, where he's traveling in these countries, India, Iran, Middle East. And then 1963, in 1963 there was a book by Bertrand Russell. It was called Unarmed Victory. And the second part of this book talked about India-China conflict, the war that took place in 1962. And he also released the letters he wrote to the leaders of India and China. So you can understand the political reasons in that case. In Naipaul's case, it's more surprising because the argument that was given was that it presents a negative image of India. But anyway, we are here, and in the 21st century, not as many books are getting banned. Things are much better, and we hope this would continue to be the case, and we would get to read these books. Even if they are bad and terrible, it doesn't really matter. It's important that we have the freedom to read and then reject those books rather than we don't get to read them. Thank you.